So we have a wonderful speaker today on cybersecurity. Jason Rorie is the founder and CEO of Triad InfoSec, and he's a U.S. Navy veteran. In the military, Jason gained technical knowledge and experience in leadership, work ethic, and conduct, which greatly influenced his career and character. He has earned 2 undergraduate degrees and a master's in information assurance and cybersecurity. Jason holds some of the most regarded IT and cybersecurity certifications, such as CISA, CISM, CCSP, and CISSP. Thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
Can you hear me okay? Awesome. All right, thank you guys. I know that sounded like a lot of C-letter alphabet soup. But yeah, thank you for coming. I want to spend some time today talking about cybersecurity and how it relates to CPA firms, especially when we're considering the FTC Safeguards Rule, the IRS Publication 4557, and the recently passed Texas Data Privacy Law. So I know it's first thing in the morning, we're talking about cybersecurity, so I'll try to keep it as lively as possible. Everybody's had their coffee, right? Yep, okay, awesome. Got my trusted notes. So yeah, we'll just jump right in. So yeah, a little bit, again, about me. My name is Jason Rorie, the founder and CEO of Triad InfoSec. My career in IT and cybersecurity started almost 30 years ago when I joined the U.S. Navy. I had a top secret security clearance in the Navy. I dealt with a lot of military grade cryptography, helping secure ship communications from ship to ship and ship to shore. So that set me on my path. When I got out of the Navy, I worked, various jobs in the IT industry, really kind of found my calling consulting and helping small businesses. So in 2006, I started my first company, which was an IT service provider. I ran that company for 16 years. I sold that company last year, and that's when I started Triad InfoSec, so we could have a laser focus on cybersecurity, risk management, and compliance services. Also, I've written a couple books on cybersecurity, and I actually have a couple copies at my table outside. It's Small Business, A Hacker's Playground. I wrote that book back in 2019 to help small businesses understand the threats that are out there to the small business community, and then how to implement safeguards to protect your business against those threats. The other book is all about compliance. It's called GRC Decoded. It just kind of breaks down all the risk management frameworks for business leaders. So we'll jump in. So why am I here? So after getting out of the military, I still wanted to continue my mission to serve. And again, when I found my calling in the small, consulting for small businesses, I think that was a great way for me to serve, because small businesses typically have challenges when it comes to protecting their business, whether it's resource constraints, whether it's budgetary constraints. So I wanted to take my knowledge throughout my career and actually bring those solutions down to small businesses where they can have the proper safeguards, and they can also be able to afford the solution. So just, I deal with all my companies that I've started. Our core values are honesty and integrity, because I know cybersecurity can be a daunting task. It can be confusing to some. So I'm here to help make sense of that and not kind of strike fear in people to try to sell solutions. I actually want to do it the honest way. So today, what we're going to talk about is cybersecurity strategies for CPA firms, and this will be kind of where we concentrate the conversation around, because these are the most important things to keep your data safe, your clients' data, and ultimately protecting your reputation. We'll talk a little bit about third-party risk around third-party assessments, third-party vendor due diligence, which is extremely important these days, and we'll get in a little bit about that. We'll also talk about regulatory compliance. So we'll get into the FTC Safeguard Rule, the IRS kind of guidelines for taxpayer data protection, and the Texas data privacy law. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the commonalities between those regulations and things you can do to help satisfy those requirements. And then finally, we'll get into a little bit around the financial side about breach likelihood, breach impact, financial breach analysis. We'll talk a little bit about cyber insurance, what that means, and things you can do to potentially lower insurance premiums as well. So before we kind of jump in, I love to kind of keep this conversational. I think it's the best way that we learn about topics like this. So at any point, if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand, let me know. I'll answer them on the fly. If you have any stories you want to tell, we can do that as well. If you need more details on anything, just please stop me, let me know. All right. So first off, we're going to get into the cybersecurity strategies. Let's get into this. Okay. So why does cybersecurity matter? So we're going to talk about increased data sensitivity, regulatory pressure, cost of breaches. One of the biggest things that I want to point out on this slide is really the bottom bullet point. If we look at the average cost of a data breach in 2024, it's $4.4 million across the board, if you take an average. What's more interesting is if you look at the graph, I know it's kind of hard to read. I think you guys hopefully have a copy of the slides. But the graph on the far left talks about the breach cost for ransomware for companies that are less than $10 million in gross revenue. So outside of the ransom fees, the cost for a business sub 10 million in gross revenue is still over $1 million in lost revenue, downtime, legal, forensics fees, and everything. So it's paramount that we put the right solutions in place, to protect your firm. So going through some of this, there's some good metrics here that I just kind of want to read through. Obviously, phishing and ransomware attacks are the most common. We probably all know about those. We're going to talk more about what are some of the new threats now that phishing emails are getting a little bit easier to identify. I think they're going to get back to a little bit more difficult to identify based on all the AI solutions that are out there now, that we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Insider threats, weak password management, again, third-party vendor risk is still a huge topic that we'll dive into. But here's kind of the numbers. So 90% of breaches involve phishing, so that's still the number one threat vector out there, is email phishing, looking for people to click links, to steal credentials. Those credentials are then sold on the dark web, and through just typical human behavior, we fall victim to password reuse. So if you go out and let's say you create an account on a third-party website because you want to buy a product, or maybe you want to sign up for their newsletter, and you register your email address for the username and the same password you love to use for everything. That's what we do, right? That third-party vendor with that product, maybe they have weak security, their website gets breached, the bad actor is able to steal a copy of all the account data, which includes your email and your favorite password. That email ends up on the dark web, a bad actor buys it, he assumes that you use the same password everywhere, so he can take that email and that password and just kind of go around looking at bank websites, any other type of sensitive website, and a lot of times is able to compromise that bank account or that email account because you use the same password. So that's why phishing is still the number one way that breaches occur. Second, if we look, a cyber attack occurs every 39 seconds. So that's a little over 2,000 attacks per day. 43 of those are targeted to small businesses, which include most CPA firms. And in a 2023 survey, it showed that 66% of small businesses experienced a ransomware attack. So why does this happen? It's because small business owners, like myself, we have a broken mindset when it comes to cybersecurity. And this is the main reason that I wrote my first book. It was to try to educate small business owners on the threats. The threats are real. And these are kind of the common reasons that small business owners don't really put in the effort and the safeguards that they truly need to have a comprehensive cybersecurity program to protect their data. And, oh, this is not going to happen to me. It hadn't happened in the past 10 years, so it's just not going to happen. Wrong. We're too small. The hackers, they don't want what we have. We don't have anything that interests them. Wrong. There's a really good saying out there that says, you're not too small to be hacked. You're just too small to make the news. We hear about the AT&Ts, United Healthcares, Targets of the world. Yeah, those breaches cost, millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. But the 43% of the small businesses that suffer ransomware attacks, we don't hear about them. Because it could be that 10-person company that suffered ransomware that may potentially have put them out of business. That's not going to make the news. So when it's not in the news, you think it's not going to happen to you. Unless it does happen to you, then it's too late. Or hopefully you've learned, it happened to a peer, unfortunately, and I've seen that a lot. It's like, oh, well, we had a competitor. This happened to them. We don't want that to happen to us. We need to do something about it. So things are going to get worse, and we're going to talk now. We'll talk a little bit about this guy. This guy's called the Hoodie Man, and I grew up in the 80s, and we all remember the Boogeyman. He was that guy that was in the closet. He was under the bed. We were scared of him as kids. But this is the digital version of that guy that I feel. It's the Hoodie Man. He's the guy that everybody thinks is the hacker. He's the guy that people think is sitting in a basement behind a laptop, and he's after you. Well, it's not the case. This guy is real. This is the kind of guy that goes after the big fish. He's the guy that goes after the Targets and the AT&Ts and tries to, kind of do that big attack, that big score. What us as small business owners need to worry about is the organized crime corporations overseas that are set up just like any other business. They got open floor, cubicles, people sitting behind keyboards, hundreds of them. And their business model is extortion. They sit there and they pound the internet, scanning IP addresses, looking for firewalls that have vulnerabilities. So kind of basically it's the same thing as leaving your front door unlocked. You have it shut, but it's unlocked. So it's still vulnerable for a burglar to come in. They're also sending out probably billions of emails, those phishing scams that we talked about, hitting inboxes, just hoping that someone will click that link or open that attachment and download that ransomware payload that will affect the machine. So again, it's not that you're too small, and it's not that, oh, I don't have anything that a hacker would want. What you have is what you've worked hard to build, which is your business. So if you don't think you have anything a hacker would want, if someone was to come in and physically take all the computers out of your office, could you still function? Probably not. Probably absolutely not. That's exactly what would happen if a hacker is able to get into your systems. If it's a ransomware attack, it encrypts all your information, so it is absolutely unusable until you kind of get into negotiation with the hackers or restore from backups or let the insurance company handle it, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But now they have what you want. You thought they didn't want what you had, but they know that that data, no matter how small it is, it's important to you. It's how you run your business. And most likely, you're probably willing to pay to get that data back. So let's talk about AI for a minute. We talked a little bit about phishing emails and why they are still the number one threat vector. Well, that landscape is changing a little bit thanks to AI. Even though really kind of on two different levels. So number one, phishing emails are getting a little bit easier to see. Most of all of us now have banners at the top of our email saying this email came from an external source. Please be safe if it has attachments. The spam engines are getting more sophisticated to catch certain threats. So the bad actors are realizing that, okay, this is not paying off like it used to. So now what can we do? So introduce AI, deepfake videos, voice cloning. These things, as you can see, are drastically increased. I mean, deepfake fraud increased by 3,000% globally in 2023. And does everybody know what a deepfake video is? Perfect. So a deepfake video, for those who doesn't, is just a fake video. You've probably seen a lot on social media. They're doing it a lot with celebrities, taking a video of them using AI to clone their voice and saying things that obviously they never said. That's one thing to kind of confuse people about what their favorite celebrity is saying, but it's actually becoming useful to these bad actors. Voice cloning as well. There was a story not too long ago where a bad actor went on LinkedIn. He was targeting a certain company, and the CEO of that company happened to do a presentation somewhere. It was recorded. It was posted on LinkedIn. It's perfect for voice cloning. Bad actor took that video, cloned the CEO's voice, called the company, asked to speak to the IT team, the help desk. They put it through. So when the bad actor got the IT guy on the phone, he said, "Hey, this is CEO, Bob," whatever his name was. "I can't log into my system. Can you reset my password for me?" Since it sounded like the CEO, he knew the CEO's name. He granted the request, changed the CEO's password, gave it to him verbally over the phone. Now the bad actor has access to the CEO's account, all because of a video that was posted on LinkedIn and using this more advanced deepfake and voice cloning technology. So this is more of this slide I've used for a long time. It's kind of becoming obsolete because of what I talked about. A lot of these things used to be massive red flags. When you're looking at email, when you're trying to see a phishing scam or not. The top one, similar domain name, may come from a person the email address looks legitimate. It may only have one letter that's off. So it's not actually coming from who you thought. That was one red flag. The second was incorrect email, misspellings. And really the biggest one to touch on that I think we all could see fairly easy was the grammatical errors in the body of the email. A lot of these things come from overseas. English is not the first language for a lot of these bad actors, so you could obviously see that in the way that they structured the content of the email. Well, back to AI, now you can take that broken, semi-broken English email content, run it through ChatGPT, it'll clean it up. Now it sounds like perfect English. So now you have to pay even more attention to these emails because they're going to look more and more sophisticated and more legitimate. So I think the mechanisms that we've used, the spam filters, the access rules, just the training is going to have to get more robust to be able to keep up with AI cleaning up these emails, and then get into more of the deepfake training. We're going to touch on that. But really, it really kind of boils down to this, and this is one thing that, I definitely, when I do full security awareness training, I always touch on humans are much easier to manipulate than computer systems. That's just the way it is. So nowadays as humans, we have to be kind of on guard through all the different mechanisms of communication. Email, still the biggest, but now we have to worry about who's on the other end of the phone, who's on the other end of that social media conversation. Is that really a legitimate video that I'm watching? So we have all these things. Who's texting me? Is this text message legitimate? Come from a legitimate number, but you can easily spoof phone numbers. So it really boils down to verifying. It boils down to slowing down and taking your time. I know everybody's busy. The world moves at a very fast pace these days. So people are just, they're busy. And email comes in from the CEO, or at least it looks like it did, but it really didn't. It was enough to fool an employee who's super busy, maybe semi-distracted because they're working from home. They've got pets and kids and all the things behind them that's a little bit distracting, and that's what the bad actors bet on. And that's why ransomware skyrocketed once the pandemic hit. So all these things are happening, but people are still not slowing down to verify. And I'll tell a quick story about verification, and this is something I was involved in a few years ago. Small company, about 25 people, transportation industry, just working every day like normal. One of the employees received a phishing email. It was the Google Play gift card scam. I'm sure people seen that. It was a very common scam several years ago. Very simplistic scam. All it said was, hey, can you go really quick and buy 6 $500 Google Play gift cards, and then when you get back, scratch the code off, send me the code so I can send it to the clients. Clients are waiting on it. So there's that urgency piece, right? And it come from the CEO. So the lady that received the email, she replied back, sure, boss, I can go. I just need a company credit card to be able to purchase it. And this was actually the first time that I actually saw a live email thread back and forth between a bad actor and someone who was falling for their scam. So he replies back, I'm in a meeting. I don't have time to get you the company credit card. Just go, please, now. I'll reimburse you. And and she replies back. She said, I don't have that kind of money on me. It's $3,000. And he's like, I don't know, figure it out. I just need it now. The clients are waiting on it. Just do something. Go get the cards now. And I guess her blood started boiling. She's starting to get frustrated. And she emailed back. She's like, look, I don't have that kind of money, and I don't really appreciate the way you're talking to me. She said, when I took this job, you said you would take care of me. I've got kids at home, and, it's a struggle financially, whatever. I just don't have that kind of money. He's like, look, I said go get the card. She's like, I quit. Screw you and this company. Now, that's basically what she said. The crazy part to that story is, again, it was a small company, 15 or 20 people. The CEO of the company was sitting in his office right down the hall. If she would have just got up, walked down the hall, knocked on his door, said, do you really need me to do this? So I'm getting this email, and he would have said, no, that's not me. Oh, that's a scam. She could have forwarded the email to the IT company, could have took care of it or deleted it or something instead of falling for it. But she did because she didn't verify. Have to verify these things. Pick up the phone, call the CEO. Maybe he's not in the office. Call him on his cell phone. You really want me to do this? And rumor has it she didn't keep her job for some reason. So again, it's just have to verify. You have to create that human firewall. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on another slide. But yeah, it's just we're busy. Everything's getting more sophisticated. AI is introducing a whole new world of threats. This is all the things now that we have to worry about. Again, we have to worry about text messaging. people on the other end of the phone. I've seen the phone thing work. Obviously, it worked on the seat for the CEO. It was actually a phone scam was the source. If everybody heard about, this was several months ago, the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, systems crashed, cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. It was because a bad actor called, talked to their help desk, and got into a system because the IT guys, of all people, were the ones that are supposed to help protect, but they fell victim to the bad actor and took down one of the world's largest casinos, cost them hundreds of millions of dollars because the IT people, for whatever reason, I don't know what their problem was, I don't know if they weren't properly trained, but it just goes to show that anybody can fall victim because these things are so sophisticated. Text messages, phone calls, emails, the deepfake videos, audio, social media. I mean, it's all over the place. It's like, it's hard to think that you can't even really have a conversation these days in any way, form possible without having to consider, is this conversation actually legitimate? Because the extortion is huge. I think there's a slide I'll hit in a little bit. In 2025, the cybercrime is estimated as an industry, if it were, to be a $10 trillion industry. They say if cybercrime was a country, it would have the third largest economy in the world. So, of course, these guys are going to keep going at it. Of course, you know, the ransoms back in 2015 when ransomware became a thing, you know, ransom was like $5,000, and people just blew it off because they're like, I'm not spending that, I'll just restore from a backup. And that was a fix. It was a legit fix. I did it for companies. But as the bad actors got more sophisticated and more smart about it, they're like, wait a minute, we're fooling these people. They're clicking the links, they're downloading the attachments, we're infecting the systems, but they're like blowing us off when we ask for money, and all they're doing is restoring from a backup, and they're back in business, and they didn't have to incur any type of financial loss for the most part other than being down for however long it took to restore the systems. So now the bad actors, when they go through that whole process and they're in the system, and right before they encrypt all your data to lock you out, they steal it. They steal a copy. Some of you may have heard about this. It's called data exfiltration. So they do that. They're holding a copy of your data. Then they encrypt it. Then they ask for the ransom, and now the ransoms are several $100,000. So now you're really in a tight place because they'll tell you. And a lot of people negotiate with these hackers. I mean, they're willing to have a conversation with you, and a lot of times you can negotiate them down to almost 10% of their asking price if you have the right negotiator. It's a crazy world. But they want something because they'll tell you, if you don't pay this ransom, if we can't work something out financially and you blow us off, we're just going to push all your data, all your clients' information out on the internet, the dark web. We'll sell it all. You know, so for guys like you, they're CPAs, I mean, think about that. You know, all the tax returns, financial statements, all the things could eventually be leaked out. And if your clients catch wind of that, identity stolen, financial information stolen, now we're talking about lawsuits. I mean, it gets into a huge mess. So that's why it's critical to protect these systems and try to prevent that from ever happening, because these guys are getting smart, they're stealing data, they're releasing it, and some of them are cocky about it. They'll actually put a timer on their website, and the time is just ticking down how long this company has before their data gets leaked out. So a lot to worry about. AI is a real person on the right, fake person on the left. You don't know. That could be the person talking to you. A very ironic story about AI image crafting, and it's ironic because the world's largest cybersecurity awareness training company, and some of you may have heard of them, it's called KnowBe4. It's actually created by Kevin Mitnick, who's one of the world's most famous hackers. He was the one that hacked into the government when he was like 16 over a dial-up modem, like back in the 80s. So he was on the FBI's most wanted list for a long time. I think he actually got caught, served time, got out, decided to go to the ethical side, to teach people how he used to do things so they could prevent that from happening to them. So he created this company called KnowBefore. Great content, great training. They fell victim themselves to an attack. A North Korean hacker created a fake AI image, used AI to create a resume. He submitted to a job opening at KnowBefore. Because of all the AI, fake resume, fake picture, they hired him. And they caught him in the act injecting malware into their training platform. So think about that. You're trying to do the right thing. You're using KnowBefore because it's the best at cybersecurity awareness training, which is absolutely critical to your cybersecurity programs to keep people trained and up to speed. You would never think that when you're downloading these training modules, you're downloading essentially a virus that was injected by a hacker who fooled a training company based on the stuff they should really be training people to be on the lookout for. So if they can fall for it, so can we. It's just, you got to be vigilant, you got to stop, you have to verify. So these are 7 things that are very common. I like to show this slide. And this is per Microsoft. I didn't make this up. These 7 things, if you train your people, like we just talked about, hopefully you're not downloading any viruses when you do it. You train your people, use what they call MDR, which is monitor, detect, and respond. It's essentially the new word for antivirus. It's a more sophisticated antivirus. A lot of MDR solutions are backed by a 24/7 security operations center, so they're monitoring for anything abnormal, malicious that could be happening on your systems, on your network, and then they can take immediate action to contain it, remediate it, whatever they need. So very common thing nowadays, most IT companies, if you use an outsourced IT company, they traditionally really do all these things, or they should. If there's one of these 7 things that the IT company is not doing, that's a conversation I feel like that would need to be had. Least privilege methodology, that's simple. It just means you don't give anybody more access than what they need to do their job. That's where a lot of companies kind of get into trouble. They're like, oh, well, just to kind of get around any hiccups and permissions and downloading applications, they just give everybody that works for the company administrator rights. That's a big no-no these days. So everybody should just have a standard user account that has limited permissions. The only people that should have the administrator accounts are trusted people on the staff, IT company, etc. Not everybody. The next one we all know, multi-factor authentication. It could be done in a lot of different ways. Most of it is you get an email or a text message with a code to log in addition to the password that you use for your computer systems or websites. Continuously patch. This is another one that kind of goes out of sight, out of mind. It's annoying for a lot of people. You see it pop up in your bottom right corner in the system tray, updates pending, and you're like, I don't want to do that. You're interrupting me. Well, the more you keep bypassing it, especially if it's not enforced to happen, those patches are important. They're patching bugs in the operating system in Windows or in third-party applications like Adobe or Google Chrome or whatever the case is. And it's those vulnerabilities left unpatched is what these bad guys use to get into your systems. They are able to manipulate these bugs once they find them. So anytime patches are available, especially the critical pieces of software, it's very important to have those patches applied as soon as possible. Protect, backup, self-explanatory. Having full backups of your data, especially if that is still your responsibility. I know a lot of us use cloud systems now, and I know, for tax prep, Thomson, CCH, a lot of people have moved purely all their workloads into one of those 2 guys' clouds or maybe another third-party cloud, which is great. It kind of does relieve you a little bit of the responsibility when it comes to backups, but there's still a lot of companies out there that keep all their data in their office, on-prem, in servers, workstations. So obviously critical to keep that data backed up. Email protection, again, back to the phishing, having a robust email protection system that's scanning emails, both coming in and going out, looking for malicious attachments, content, links that need to be quarantined. So if you do these 7 things and do it well, Microsoft says you'll block 98% of all the cyber attacks. It's just a lot of people don't do the simple things because they don't feel like they need to, because they feel like they're too small and the hackers don't want what they have. And we already talked about it's a broken mindset. You need to do these things. So to kind of touch a little bit more on, if you look at the full picture around a cybersecurity program, we're going to get a little bit deeper into the framework side of things in a little bit. But it kind of breaks down to administrative, technical, physical controls around data. Administrative is another thing that a lot of people kind of ignore. These are policies, procedures, very critical to regulatory requirements that we'll talk about. Obviously, the technical controls are very similar to what we just talked about with the 7 things. They're what are these technical safeguards that mitigate risk. I say the technical safeguards are important. The administrative, because administrative kind of lumps in training, lumps in all the human type controls. Those are the most important. And the technical controls and the way that they mitigate risk is kind of like having your back, because you can do all the training you want. Somebody's still going to click that link. So you have to have the software on the endpoint, the laptop, the desktop, the servers to help contain that if it does come to fruition, if that person still doesn't, if the training's not clicking, they may be a repeat offender. You got to have something that compensates that human control to stop that threat from materializing. And that's essentially creating the human firewall. That's what I say. You've got to train. You have to train on a regular basis. There's a lot of compliance out there that says, oh, you must conduct cybersecurity awareness training annually. I laugh at that. I was like, that's not enough. You send out a little 5-minute video once a year. Is that really training people? No. My suggestion and what I try to encourage organizations to do is phishing simulations monthly, and then training videos that are short, because we are busy, get it, but short but engaging, 5 minutes, but do that quarterly. And that keeps everybody kind of up to speed on what the threats are. You got the phishing simulations going out every month. You're able to get that initial baseline, see trends over time. You can identify the repeat offenders, so they pull them aside, and maybe give them some additional training. We don't want anybody to lose their job, but we have to consider the fact that if they're not getting it, if people are still just blowing off the training and they're not focused on becoming a human firewall, because ultimately cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. Because if you sit behind a keyboard, you're at risk, you're a target. And with one click, you can take down the whole company, potentially. So you have to pay attention to that training. You have to be aware of what's going on. You have to be vigilant. So those people, you have to train these people, and you have to be able to see that the training is being effective. So when you do all these things, you're doing them well, you're mitigating risk. You'll get to a certain point through your risk management strategy, through your risk mitigation efforts, and you'll get to a point to where, look, we've done everything that we can to mitigate these risks. We still know that there's potential for financial loss because nothing's bulletproof. There's still a chance that something could happen, even as much as we've done. So that's when cyber insurance comes in, and I'll get a little bit deeper into it. But essentially, it's a risk a risk transfer strategy. Say, okay, there's potential we could still have $1 million loss in the event of an incident. So we need to ensure that we have $1 million in coverage to help transfer that financial risk that's left over. We do all that right, you end up at risk acceptance. We've done everything we can. The likelihood of something happening now is reduced as much as possible, and then the potential impact, if an incident does materialize, is also as small as possible. Now we can hopefully sleep at night because we've done everything that we can. So third parties, this one's fun. So I like to touch on two different areas when it comes to third party risk. Number one, we're going to talk about is third party risk assessments. A couple stories about this one too. So with the evolution of the cloud, with the evolution of a lot of outsourcing, it saves money, increases productivity, increases profit. We all know these things. But what we need to do is make sure that everything that we're still responsible for is actually secure and it's actually working. All right, so there is a release of some of the responsibility, if you will, by moving to the cloud. There's a thing called shared responsibility. A lot of people might think that, oh, because everything's in the cloud, I'm good. No, you're not. Because you chose to put your data, which in your cases is your client's data, in this cloud. That was your choice. If that cloud vendor gets breached and your client's information gets leaked out, the clients are not mad at the cloud vendor, they're mad at you. You're the one that picked them. So this is where it kind of gets into the risk assessment and the due diligence. I always say, especially if you still have everything in your office on-prem, you have an IT company, you like them. I'm not here to bash IT companies. I used to own one, so don't get me wrong about this. But you trust them, you like them. They obviously have the keys to the kingdom. They have access to everything that you have, all the data that you own. They're there to protect you. That's their job. But do you trust them enough, or your internal IT guy, maybe you have one on staff. If you trust the people who have all this level of access, do you trust them enough with that entire business livelihood? Are you doing something for checks and balances? Are you having a third party come out, unbiased, outside looking in view, to do a risk assessment, to test what this IT company or your cybersecurity company, test what they're doing? They have controls implemented, but they're useless if they're not working or if they're not implemented correctly. That's what the third party assessment will show. And a perfect story about this is in New York. I just read it recently. It was a healthcare company. I think they were an ENT practice, large. They outsourced all their cybersecurity. All the patching, really all the 7 things that we talked about earlier was completely outsourced. So this ENT practice trusted that stuff was getting done the way that it should. The ENT practice got hacked. So the Attorney General's office got involved, the Office of Civil Rights got involved, all the HIPAA stuff got involved. And at the end of the day, what they found was the bad actors were able to hack in because security patches were not being applied effectively to the systems. So the Attorney General's office made this practice invest over $2 million in enhanced cybersecurity measures, all because the IT company, the cybersecurity company that they trusted to outsource their protection to wasn't doing their job. They were asleep at the wheel. If there would have been a third-party risk assessment done, and someone would come in and check what they're doing, checks and balances, that would have been exposed in the risk assessment. Hey, these systems aren't patched or these systems aren't backed up. It gives you the opportunity to fix it before it becomes an issue. But in their case, it became an issue. There was another good story. I think it'll come to me in a second. But that's really the key thing, is have the checks and balances. And I kind of relate it to, the CPA world in a bit. I mean, there's a lot of firms that do audit work. You go out, do SOC 1 audits. You're testing financial controls to make sure your clients are doing what they're supposed to do from the financial perspective. Well, we do the same thing. Cybersecurity companies go out, it's on the SOC 2 level, testing controls around security. So I think it's smart for every organization to go through that exercise. And it's not to throw the IT people or the company under the bus. It's not to displace them. It's just the way to just kind of keep tabs and make sure everything is being done the way that it should. And I got to find this story. Let me see here. Yeah, I got it. So another story around trusting the IT people and having the risk assessments done. Another IT company is a large financial organization that has several companies under their umbrella. Well, this company was trusted to do all the IT management, all the cybersecurity, all the things. Well, this financial organization, they actually invoked the checks and balances. They actually had a company, a very big company, cybersecurity-wise, come out and do penetration testing. Test all the things. And the penetration testing company was able to hack the password that the IT company was using to manage company A. That's bad enough, but it gets worse. Back to password reuse, back to just human nature. Oh, it's easy for the techs to be able to log in to company A, company B, maybe company C under the umbrella, all with the same account. And that's exactly how they had it set up. So in this penetration testing company, and thankfully they're doing it obviously in an ethical manner, once they were able to compromise that IT admin account in company A, they immediately were able to compromise company B because it was the same password. So instantaneously, they have full access to two companies based on just one password hack. So that screams a lot of issues. First off, why were they able to hack that password so easily? You know, it must have, there's no way it could have been up to what today's standards are when it comes to complexity. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hack it that fast. It's impossible. So it had to be a weak password reuse, and these are the guys that are trusted to protect this company. So luckily, that one was found and corrected before they ended up like the ENT practice and had to invest millions of dollars and probably had a lot of penalties involved because the people they trusted were asleep. So that kind of leads into, that's what we talked about. Yeah, vendor due diligence. So before you migrate your data to the cloud, or before you sign up for a new piece of software, or before you hire that IT vendor, you need to do a lot of due diligence around these guys. And that's what I preach about people migrating to the cloud. Again, it is a wonderful thing to do, but you need to ensure that they are doing everything that they should be doing to secure your data before you actually get contractually bound to these guys. So, you know, the typical process, and some of you may have seen it, you know, there's a vendor due diligence spreadsheet that you could use. The most common scenario now is asking these cloud vendors if they've gone through some type of audit process. Back to SOC 2 is one of the big ones here in the US. Maybe if they operate internationally, maybe they've done ISO 27001. Those two are, you know, kind of audited efforts, if you will. So as a company vetting out these vendors, if you can produce this audit report, you know, it kind of puts people at ease. Okay, you're obviously doing what you need to do for security, and you know it's been validated by a third party. So this is very critical because a lot of companies don't do this, and they just, oh, this sounds cool. You know, this will help us out. This will make us more productive, more efficient. It's cheap. There's probably a reason why it's cheap. Maybe because they're not investing the money in security. And again, you have no control over how their security is set up. So if they are breached and it affects you, then you kind of have to share some of that responsibility of the breach because you chose them, because you didn't do your due diligence to ensure that they're actually doing what they say they should. So again, third-party assessors, I mean, vendor due diligence, vendor management is also now a key piece of compliance that we'll talk about. It, no matter if you're looking at the FTC Safeguard Rule, if you're looking at IRS, you know, their guidelines for taxpayer data protection, if you look at the SEC guidelines, even if you cross out of financial, go into healthcare, go into DoD contracting, it doesn't matter if there's a regulatory compliance that needs to be met, vendor or supplier, in some terms, management is key to do that. You know, you won't get through an audit today by an auditor without showing proof that you're actually doing some type of vendor management and due diligence process when allowing them to store or process your information that just happens to be sensitive. So that's key, and then it's key to continuously test them. You know, I mean, even when people need penetration testing or vulnerability scanning, and maybe they use even some of the big box clouds, AWS, Microsoft, you can still do penetration testing against them, obviously with their approval, but it's still critical to do. So vendor management, huge. You just have to be very careful, have those checks and balances, make sure that people are tested, because vendors can easily get complacent. Everything's smooth, everything's running, you haven't really had any issues yet, and then that's kind of when they start falling asleep at the wheel. So having somebody come in and test periodically keeps them on their toes. All right, so before I jump into the compliance issues, anybody have any questions on what we talked about so far? Anything I can explain in more detail? Yes, sir.
What if somebody gets a concern about the cloud, their ability to evaluate a provider? Do you go back to the old offsite storage on an extra drive somewhere?
So you're saying if you're looking at a cloud vendor and they can't really demonstrate proper security? Is that okay? Yeah, so the question is, if you're looking at a cloud vendor, you're evaluating maybe a bunch of different options, and the one that you like, they can't produce this type of information. They can't show you that they're doing what they're supposed to do. So the question is, what do you do in that case? It's a great question. I've seen it done two different ways. Number one is you can still send them a spreadsheet. A lot of companies do this, and they can self-attest that they're actually doing it. They just don't have audited proof that they're doing it. To me, that's not sufficient. But in some cases, I'm not the one making the decision. So a lot of companies will take that. It's like, hey, if you say and you're willing to sign this document and say you're doing it, we're going to trust that you're doing it because we want to work with you. The other case is they can't prove it. They don't have something that's audited, so there's not that hard proof. Then they're out of the running. Their RFP, their bid, whatever proposal just gets thrown in the trash, and you go find someone that can prove themselves out. So, great question. Yes, ma'am.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm a volunteer treasurer for a nonprofit, and occasionally I get emails that are obviously fake. But the first one I didn't realize it was fake initially. It says from the president telling me to transfer money.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell when I look at the email address, it's not the person's real email address. But the first time I thought I did engage with them a little bit. I'm like, well, they're like, we need a wire transfer now.
Yeah.
And when you know they're fake, do you engage at all or just delete it?
Great question. So the question is, if you receive a phishing email, what's the kind of appropriate action? And actually, wire fraud is actually the number 2 reason for insurance claims, because people fall for it that often. So the question is, what do you do when you receive it and you realize that it is phishing? You don't act on it. Really depends on the company policy. Again, there's 2 different things I've seen. A lot of companies, kind of in their security policies, and if they're following them, they'll train the staff to say, if you receive a phishing email, you have any questions, any doubts, forward it to the IT team, IT company, let them do further investigation, because at that point they can do rules and blocks to make sure that maybe that it can't come from that same source again. But that's a never-ending battle, but it's good for the IT company to do, because essentially you'll block a decent share. The other thing is, a lot of people say, hey, if you see it, just delete it. Don't take up any extra resources of people's time. It's fake. Even if you have semi-doubts, just delete it. Because the way I tell people is, if you delete a legitimate email, they'll email you again. you know, or they'll pick up the phone and call you. Did you get my email? So to be on the safe side is, yeah, you know, deleted is perfectly safe. Yes, ma'am.
You don't say, I know you're after it.
No, I wouldn't respond because yeah, it's almost like picking up that phone call from a telemarketer. Now they know there's a live person on the other end. They're gonna keep calling you, right? So that's the thing. You don't want them to know that there's somebody that actually received it and then could be potentially willing to engage, because then they're just going to keep on. So yeah, I would definitely not respond to it. Delete it, forward it to the IT company. Outside of that, that's really what I would definitely suggest doing. Yes, sir.
Today, so many of our programs that we use are downloaded through an internet connection. How do we know Microsoft, Apple, QuickBooks, Tax Act, so forth, that they're compliant and haven't been infiltrated by a threat from that actor?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was how can you rest assured that these third-party applications that you download that should be legitimate and to help you do your job actually truly are legitimate? You know, the ones coming from these big vendors, and there's always a small possibility that, yes, Microsoft, QuickBooks, you know, all the big players have potentially been compromised. It's hard to know that before you download the program. That's why it's really critical to have those internal mitigation pieces in place. Like going back to one of the 7 things, which was the MDR, the monitor, detection, and response. Its job in life to run on your system is to detect those things. So if you download a piece of software that you feel is legitimate, it comes from a legitimate source, but may actually be malicious, because there is a lot of third-party softwares out there that are. And once that piece of software is installed, that MDR software should recognize the malicious code and either block it from being installed, or once it installs, I mean, these things are so sophisticated now. The softwares can cut access to the internet, isolating your machine. So in case it is like something like ransomware, it won't spread. So I would just say, I mean, if it's an unknown third party, yeah, I mean, I would definitely question that. It probably would be a good thing to maybe ask the IT company, you know, that you use, you know, is this legitimate if it's maybe a third party you haven't heard of. The big guys that you have heard of, I mean, you're just kind of trusting them by name and just hoping that they haven't had any incidents that would lead to, you know, their software being malicious. So that's when the other mitigation and the compensating controls come into effect. Yes, sir.
Well, we were talking about all big downloads, just like QuickBooks and so forth. But some of these now, they've got it in the cloud. You can't back that up to a desktop or laptop computer, so you've got a hard copy. Because you don't have a program on your machine that will even run it.
Yeah, that is true. So yeah, the question and the concern is, yeah, using these third-party vendors, they do kind of, everything is in the cloud. So, you know, I know I dealt with like virtual office and things, you know, with some of the tax prep software back in my previous company. So I understand where you're coming from. And once you log into this cloud, everything is in the cloud. Everything is virtualized. And yes, there is no, and the reason for that is so you don't need those local applications anymore. Now, backups traditionally would fall under their responsibility as part of what you're paying for. But the concern is, well, if something happens to them, then my data could go away. They should have some type of capability to do some type of export. And then you could save that export file to your local computer. So let's just say if something happened to the cloud environment, if you have that export that you're doing manually on a regular basis, you know, just to rest assured that, yeah, I have a copy in my possession of my data, my client's data, and you would be able to import or restore that export into a local application, you know, if you were to put it back on your local computers and be able to use it. So,
But the biggest one of all of those has been, I've got several clients who travel internationally. They can't use their computer with the cloud over the ocean 99% of the time. And they're all going, let's make sure we get programs.
right. No, that's a valid concern about accessing cloud infrastructure from overseas locations. Is it an issue that is too slow, or is it an issue that they can't get in at all? What's your experience there?
I had one come back, he just got through going over to Singapore, Hong Kong, and then back to Paris and back home. Every
That's a lot.
time he's over the water, just the wireless, the internet connection was almost non-existent.
Yeah, that definitely see that. I mean, and that's one of the biggest cons of using cloud-based software is connectivity, especially when you're traveling, when you're overseas. There's so many hops, if you will, in between the connectivity. You're crossing the pond, you're getting back to the U.S., you're getting in, and it could be so slow that it's unusable. So I understand the concern there. That's really just something that would have to be addressed with a cloud vendor. Is there some way that you could work offline and then it sync back up when you have reliable service?
It's online, doesn't
No.
do anything. The question about opening the software, you get some that keeps coming, and you want it not to come anymore. How do you know when you open it? You have to open it to unsubscribe to it. If you open it and unsubscribe, are you taking the same risk?
Yeah, I mean, if you keep getting bombarded with requests, I guess, to download the software, and if you're getting emails to download it, and if there's the ability to unsubscribe so you don't continue to receive those requests, you shouldn't receive them anymore. There's a whole spam law that protects that. I know a lot of times it doesn't work. Trust me, I know. But in theory, if you unsubscribe, they should take you off the list, and you shouldn't worry about them, really bothering you anymore. Otherwise, you could just block the source that's sending it. Have your IT guys do that, and then that should hopefully fix up the issue.
One of my friends said he's glad that the environment has changed a little bit. We're out of all the political stuff. He said, I said one email address for anything was political, so I just deleted the email.
Yeah. No, I used to have a rule in my inbox that if there was subscribe, unsubscribe, opt in, opt out, any of those terms would get just automatically deleted. So I wouldn't even have to see them. So great question. All right, so we'll jump into the regulatory compliance and talk a little bit about the FTC Safeguard Rule, IRS, Texas data privacy, and how all these things play a role in data protection, and some of the things that you guys as CPAs who are covered under the FTC Safeguard Rule, obviously the IRS, and so the things that you can do to make sure that you're compliant with their regulations. So you're going to see kind of a common theme as I get into this around these three regulatory frameworks, and the privacy is actually a law. It's a little bit different, but what you'll see is a lot of commonalities between the three because at a foundational level, cybersecurity is the same. If you think about, I like to use a house analogy in a lot of cases where the foundation of the house, if it's a concrete foundation, is kind of poured the same way. But the house is going to look different maybe from your neighbors because the floor plan is different. The way it's built is different, but the foundation is essentially the same methodology. And it's going to be the same through these guys. So the FTC Safeguard Rule is just protecting consumer, client, customer data, whichever word you want to use for it. So a lot of the core requirements are a lot of the things that we've already talked about. I'll get a little bit deeper into it. So the top 5 things that the FTC Safeguard Rule calls out. Number 1 is having a written information security plan. And in that plan, there has to be several things. And a lot of you guys may be familiar with written information security plan because I know this year it was a new requirement to have one on file to be able to renew your e-filing license or PIN number, right? Yeah. So the plan encompasses these things. So number 1, they want to designate a qualified individual. So you have to call someone out by name in your organization that's ultimately responsible for the cybersecurity program. Number 2 is conduct that risk assessment. So it's kind of back to what we talked about with the third-party risk management, is have somebody come in, do a risk assessment, look at all the systems, look at the cloud, look at all the things, and come back with their findings to see if there's any gaps, room for improvement, if there's anything missing, needs to be upgraded, They should build a remediation plan that could, have a bunch of actionable steps for you or for your IT company, whoever you deem responsible for plugging those gaps. Then ongoing part of the plan and the requirement is to have a risk management strategy that's ongoing. So doing quarterly vulnerability scans, annual pen testing, having real-time continuous monitoring of the systems, and that's basically the MDR that we talked about. So you have to have all these things in place, have to be documented, they have to be provable. Incident response plan, big deal. The incident response plan is your playbook on what do we do if we suffer a cyber incident. If we get hacked and we come in tomorrow morning and realize ransomware has spread across all our computer systems, we are completely dead in the water, how do we react? What do you do? Who do you call? What happens? Got to have a plan for that. And the written information security plan says you should have an incident response plan. So the key place is to get together with somebody familiar with this process to write that plan. You have certain, members of the organization, outsourced legal counsel, your cyber insurance carrier. All these people become part of what they call the security incident response team, or the CERT team. And then typically on an annual basis, you'll do what they call a tabletop exercise, and that is getting all of the responsible parties in a room, virtually or physically, and mock up a scenario. Again, you got to practice. That way, when it comes time to play the game, you actually know what to do, and you're not running around, because the ultimate goal in an incident is to respond to it quickly, contain it, get rid of it, and recover from it. And the only way to do that quickly is to know exactly what you need to do throughout the different phases of incident response, instead of not practicing, and then you're just running around trying to figure stuff out, and that's going to lead to longer than necessary downtime, which is obviously going to impact you financially. So oversee the service providers. Again, that's back to risk management, testing them, testing your systems. So you see there's a common theme behind all of this that we've talked about. So there's a lot more to it, but these are the top 5 things to definitely pay attention to when it comes to complying with the FTC Safeguard Rules, having that WISP in place, having all of these things defined in the written information security plan, but also have proof of actually doing these. Because a lot of attorneys will tell you having a plan that has been disseminated throughout the organization, agreed upon, signed off, everybody understands it, and then you don't do what you're supposed to do, you don't fulfill the requirements of the plan, is legally worse than not having a plan at all. So get a plan together and get all the missing pieces. That way everything flows correctly. So the IRS Publication 4557, it's actually a good document for protecting taxpayer data. I mean, it's good stuff to actually protect any type of data. Coming from the IRS, I mean, it's very required stuff. I would say it's stuff that you can do at a baseline to be compliant. A lot of it is touching on those 7 things I mentioned earlier. Some of the key safeguards here is having that security plan we just talked about. Everything being encrypted as much as possible. So if you're working, from home and you're accessing information in the cloud, or you have a VPN connection that ties you back into your office to work, making sure that all of that information happening in transit, as they call it, is encrypted. By today's standards, most of it is. You really don't do anything these days, to be honest with you, that's not already encrypted. You can just kind of choose different encryption levels. So the authentication, hugely important. It's back to having proper password hygiene, the proper password policies for all the sensitive platforms that you use, cloud, local, and those policies are enforced. Looking at 16 characters, complexity using uppercase, lowercase, special characters, not being able to use the last 5 passwords that you used before. The passwords expire every 90 days. Those type things need to be enforced. And then on top of that, enforcing multi-factor authentication. because multi-factor authentication probably, out of everything we talked about, is the number one thing that you should do. If you can't show that you're doing multi-factor authentication, if you were ever to go through an audit, an insurance claim, anything that would get you in trouble, if you can't show that you're doing multi-factor, you're going to be in trouble. It's one of the most easiest things to do, and it's one of the most important safeguards because of all the email, the wire transfer fraud emails, the phishing emails, and there's a business email compromise, and that's people sitting in these inboxes. They're waiting. I've seen it happen. I've seen where, financial firms' emails got compromised, and a bad actor was sitting in the email inbox. Nobody knows because it's not being monitored. They didn't have multi-factor, so it was easy to hack into this mailbox. And he's just sitting there watching the emails, going back and forth. And this financial company, it was a loan company, I believe, and they were part of a real estate transaction. It was a land transaction worth about, it was like $3 million transaction. So they were sitting at the table closing, and all of a sudden, the person running, the closing got an email from the financial company, said, hey, real quick, I know you're at the closing, the wiring instructions for the down payment just changed. So there's only one way they could do it with that type of timing, and that's to be already in the email, seeing the correspondence, knowing that closing's happening, knowing what time, and then being able to draft that sophisticated email that looks legitimate and send it out. And it actually is legitimate because they send it out from the financial company's inbox. So all the email address, where it came from, all that's legitimate because it's being sent from a real person that should be part of the process. It's just being sent by a bad person who just happened to be sitting in their inbox. And luckily in that case, one of the guys that was part of that closing, part of that land deal, was an IT guy. And he's like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. And they were able to stop it. So having multi-factor is crucial to kind of prevent those type of things from happening. So top 5 requirements for the IRS publication for safeguarding taxpayer data. Very common theme again, written information security plan, strong encryption, multi-factor training. Another important one, as we talked about, is having that comprehensive training program. Again, annual, not enough. Need to be doing it at a much more frequent pace than that, even though an annual 5-minute video will allow you to check a box on a compliance application. It's just still not enough. Incident response plan, we talked about that. Being able to practice, so when it's time for the big game, you know what to do. So the Texas data privacy law. So I'll touch a little bit on this because I am not an attorney, and since this is law, it has a bunch of legal aspects to it, but there's still a lot of, again, commonalities between the way to comply to this law when it comes to storing or using customer data for certain purposes. So we'll talk about kind of the top 5 things that you can do. So it's a little bit different, and a lot of it is around personal information. So let's say, for example, someone goes to your website and they fill out a contact form for services. You capture a lot of their information, name, address, phone number, email, maybe some other things. So how you use that data per this law and per any privacy law that's out there, I know it's at a lot of the state level in the U.S., there's some international like GDPR, that touches on the European Union and how they protect European citizens. So very common stuff. How do you use it? Having a privacy policy linked on your website is one of the key things to have. That way, if someone's concerned about what you're doing with their personal data, once they submit that form, that privacy policy should spell that out. There's a lot of pieces to the law that may require you to have some sort of way for an individual to contact you and make a request to remove their personal information from your systems, and you have to comply with that. I like the term that they use with GDPR in the EU It's called the right to be forgotten. And it actually pertains to everybody. I mean, essentially, if you're a European citizen, you could contact Google and say, I want you to remove every shred of search results about me that you have. And they have to comply because you have the right to be forgotten. So that's really all it's about, is having those measures, the privacy policy, privacy notices. It's just putting people at ease on, hey, if you reach out to us and you give us all your personal information, we're going to use it for legitimate purposes. We're not going to sell it. We're not going to spam you. We're not going to do anything bad. We're going to use it for legitimate purposes to provide you, our goods and services as you requested. How are we doing on time? Just want to make sure I get enough time to do. Oh yeah, we're good. Okay. So the final section that we'll talk about is reducing breach costs. Talk about insurance premiums, kind of focusing in on some of these financial aspects. So again, I mentioned earlier the average breach right at $4.5 million. Of course, it is average, so there are some breaches that are multi-million dollars. There's some that are just a few $100,000, but if you look at it on average, it's 4.5. I mean, and these numbers are staggering. They've been increasing year over year, and that just shows, like I had mentioned earlier, about the type of, I guess, extortion revenue that the cybercrime industry has, because in 2023, it was only $8 trillion. So by 2025, it would be $10.5 trillion. So you can kind of see how fast this is climbing, and it's doing so because people are still getting hacked. Ransomware is still a real thing. Business email compromise, wire fraud, it's all still a real thing. It's happening to people every day. And it's happening because they don't have the right safeguards in place. So how do you really protect yourself? This is what I tell people. I go back to the house. A risk management framework like NIST CSF, CIS 18, ISO 27001, SOC 2, there's a bunch of them. There's some that are forced upon people that are in highly regulated. If anybody works or knows anybody in the defense contracting world, CMMC is their regulation. It's their framework that they have to follow. For me, it's almost paramount that any organization, even if you don't have to stare down regulatory requirements, you're in an unregulated industry, you should still build a cybersecurity program based off a framework. And all the framework is the floor plan to your house. So again, at a foundational level, it's the same. The framework's the floor plan. It allows you to go step by step, checklist, items down the row, tells you exactly how to build the house that would be compliant to that floor plan or that framework. And a lot of it is really what we talked about earlier, the 7 things again, some of the written information security plans, but a lot of these frameworks go into more detail. They get more deeper into the policies. The SOC 2, for example, to comply with that framework and requirement, there's probably 25, 28 different IT security policies that have to be written and followed. And again, you have to kind of do a flow down approach. You have the policies that kind of set the expectation. This is what the organization expects people to do, staff, vendors, contractors, whoever. This is the expectation to follow to protect our data. Then you have to have procedure documents, okay? So the policy says we have to do this. The procedure says this is how we're going to do it. It's how we're going to do complex passwords. This is how we're going to assess vendors, how we do all the things. Then you have to actually have documented artifacts, screenshots, configs, reports to actually show that you're actually doing what the procedure says to do in real time. The policy says passwords should look like this. The procedure says you implement it in Office 365 like this. Then you have screenshots of Office 365 showing that you actually did it. And if all 3 of those don't flow together and they're not identical, you get dinged on an assessment. So whatever the policy says, you have to be doing, and at the frequency. If the policy says quarterly vulnerability scanning, and you can only show that you do vulnerability scanning every 6 months, then you're not in compliance with your own policies. So that's part of the framework. The other pieces are the technical controls that outline all the things that you should really be doing around password management, MDR, malware protection, backups, incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity. And all these things are very important, because when you align yourself with this framework and you do, like, say, an initial gap analysis on what I'm doing today versus what the framework says I should be doing, it could be very eye-opening, and it could show things that you didn't really think about, that never really crossed your mind. Maybe if you outsource your IT or cybersecurity, they didn't bring it up, but it could be critical components to a full security program, because ultimately what we're trying to do with this framework, what we're trying to do with our house, is lower the likelihood of an incident occurring. And if an incident does occur, because again, no bulletproof solutions out there, that the impact will be low. And the framework is what gets us there. It's an organizational tool. If you don't have to be audited, then if you have to be audited, then you have to actually follow it, stroke by stroke. So this kind of just touches on what I just mentioned. If you follow the framework, you follow it to a T, you do the gap analysis, you identify room for improvements, room for new implementation, you put in the effort, and you are fully aligned with these frameworks that essentially will require a culture shift within your organization, because now people have to operate on a daily basis a little bit different, possibly, than the way they have before, because there may be new ways to report phishing emails, or there may be new ways to contact IT, new policies to follow, new ways to do their job. But that's okay, because that's the way that it should be. You should have a security-focused culture, because everyone should know that they're responsible for the security program. It's not just the C-suite, it's not just the owner, it's everybody behind that keyboard. It's your responsibility. And aligning with the framework and building a program will essentially get you to that point. So we talked about this earlier. Again, building the framework, the goal is to minimize as much risk as humanly possible. So we minimize the risk by building the program. We're implementing all these controls. We're training our people, doing everything that we can within budget. But then we get to that point where there's still some residual risk. And that's when we go into the cyber insurance policy and having a look at that. And then that'll be kind of where I wrap up, is to get a little bit deeper into cyber insurance, because there's a lot of things that a lot of organizations miss that could really kind of bite them in the end with the insurance policy. So cyber insurance, I'm sure everybody knows what cyber insurance is. It is a policy that protects you against the financial impact of a cyber incident. And there's a lot of things in the cyber insurance policy that you can file a claim against. It doesn't necessarily have to be ransomware. You don't have to be staring down the bad actors wanting, $250,000 in ransom to get your data back to file a cyber insurance claim. It could be the wire fraud. If you fell for it, you actually sent that money, you can file a claim. If you had a cyber incident that really didn't impact your customers, no data was leaked out, so you're not really looking at any legal or penalties type trouble, but your systems were down for 3 days while everything was restored and put back in operation. Well, you can file a claim against your insurance policy for business income loss. So you can kind of help recoup some of that lost revenue because of productivity being down because your systems are down. So some of the things, obviously the carriers want to see a lot of different things. So I got into the cyber insurance world back when it really kind of hit the market, back in like 2018. I actually owned part of an insurance agency that focused solely on selling cyber insurance. So I got educated on what the carrier's expectations were, which at the time was very, very lax. They would basically ask you, what's your business? What's your SIC code? How many records do you have? How much revenue do you have for the past 12 months? Maybe what's anticipated for the next 12 months? All right, cool. And here's $1 million in coverage. Your annual premium was like $1,000. It was crazy. Well, yes, sir.
Based on your experience, which carriers are top of the game?
All right, yeah, so great question. So the question is, which cyber insurance carriers are kind of cream of the crop? Really good question. In my experience, there's a lot of good ones out there. I mean, I think Chubb still runs the market as far as global market share on cyber insurance policies. There's a lot of other carriers out there that I've seen have really good policies. Some are smaller, may not be known to the masses, but like Axis is one. The Coalition is another. I mean, the Hartford, a bigger name, has a good one. That's I use for my previous company, Travelers. So really, a lot of these carriers, I mean, if you look at A+, A++ rated carriers, they're probably going to have a really good insurance product. But it all depends on what they're quoting you. So you have to pay close attention to the limits of the policy. So you've got first party, third party coverages, whether it's your fault, not your fault, all the things and the different ways it's covered. But there's a lot of times where if you're not really paying attention and really have the application done correctly, I would say, because it is very technical. Now, versus what I just mentioned about 4 or 5 questions about your business and you get a policy, now it's a 10-page application that's almost as deep as most of the risk management frameworks. They want to know all this stuff. And can you prove it? And that's how they're basing their risk. But that's one of the reasons I got out of that industry. It's because I was watching businesses be turned down to auto-renew their insurance policy. They got pushed back through underwriting. They came out the other end with their premiums increased by 300 or 400% because now the carriers understood the risk. So now it's kind of flattened out because, man, those insurance carriers, they got kicked in the pants for several years because they were given $2, $3 million policies and they weren't asking the right questions, and these companies were getting hacked and getting ransomware, and the insurance company, because of the insurance policy, had to foot the bill. Well, they kind of changed the game, and now they still bundle. I mean, you can still get a cyber like rider to more of an umbrella style policy, like a BOP or GLPL type policy. I always recommended against that. I'm a big fan of cyber being standalone. It might could be bundled with E&O if you need errors and omissions. I'm up here sounding like an insurance agent, sorry, but I would definitely recommend, number one, that it's a standalone policy. Number two, that if you don't know how much insurance you truly need to be able to do risk transfer correctly, there are ways to have kind of a deeper dive, like on your company's insurability, to see how much you really need. What does your market bear? What are the historical data up to this point shows that, okay, if you're a CPA firm and you have 10 employees, you're doing $5 million in revenue, and you have all this many records, and you put all this stuff together, there's tools out there that can compile all that and then run historical trends through an algorithm and say, okay, based on your makeup, this is essentially what your impact would be on ransomware, or your impact for this, impact for that, and you can plan accordingly because you kind of know that number, that true dollar figure. So then you want to look at your insurance policy, because some of the really important things like breach cost or the ransom payback, extortion cost, all the carriers use a little bit of different language, but they'll do sublimits. So you have to be very careful about that. Okay, thank you. So the sublimits are, you may have $1 million in coverage for the majority of things, but some of the things that might be really important, like the extortion fees, may have a $100,000 sublimit. So you only got $100,000 to cover ransom fees instead of $1 million. So just kind of some things to pay attention to when it comes to insurance, but it's very critical to have. And I always suggest taking a look at your insurance policy. There's nothing wrong with shopping it, especially if it's not a standalone, but make sure you get technical people involved to make sense of it, because the application is complex, it is very technical, and the last thing you want to do is check a bunch of yeses if you're not really doing those things, because that's the fast way to get your claim denied. So this is wrapping it up. Again, all this becomes a complete solution. So if you look at the framework, is how we build our house. Our house is our cybersecurity program. We do all the things that we need. We look at the administrative controls, which are our policies, procedures, our training. We look at our technical controls, which is the backups, the MDR, the passwords, the multi-factor, all these things that continue to mitigate risk that may slide by the human factor. And if you build this program and use a framework to help guide you to ensure that you aren't missing anything, that you are building a program that's going to be successful to mitigate all these threats down, you have the right insurance policy in place. So now you're at this risk acceptance level. Well, what you'll find is that's putting you in compliance with FTC, with the IRS, with the data, and possibly maybe with a few extra steps since the privacy law is a little bit different, but you're most of the way there. So it becomes a very comprehensive thing, becomes part of your overall business processes. New way to do business, because like building a house, you don't just build it and leave it. You still have to maintain the house. Yeah, still have to have electricity, still have to mow the yard, you still have to do all these things. Well, it's the same way with your cybersecurity program. It takes continuous monitoring, continuous testing, periodic policy review. So it just becomes part of the operations. It's part of how you run your company. Final takeaway, kind of what I said. I'll just read it. A strong cybersecurity program protects your data, protects your clients, saves your reputation, aligns with legal requirements, lowers financial risk, and will transform into an integral part of your firm's culture. So it's doing the right thing. It's building that program, focus on everything, do your due diligence, do your protection, test people, don't put 100% trust in anybody, have the right insurance, and ultimately you're minimizing that risk. And that is it. So I think we have just a few minutes left for some final questions, comments. Anything? Yes, sir.
Early on, you mentioned the MGM brand attack. Did they have enough insurance coverage to mitigate?
Ooh. Yeah, that's a really good question. The question was, did the MGM Grand, when they got compromised and shut the casinos down and lost hundreds of millions, did they have enough insurance to cover that financial impact? I can't give you a definitive answer. I don't know if, from an insurance perspective, if they did. My initial guess, just based on the sheer amount of money, probably no. You know, I think that they probably had to pull some reserves out, or they just suffered that loss. You know, and we know how much money those casinos make on a daily basis, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's a crazy scenario, especially since it was a bad actor manipulating the IT staff to let them in. So it pays to make sure your IT people are doing what they need to do as well. Yes, sir.
The firm uses a lot of cloud software. What cybersecurity software would you suggest just for laptops and desktops?
Yeah, so the question is, if you're using cloud-based software, what are good cybersecurity softwares to use on the local computer? I still, an MDR solution would be number one, because you want to still be able, even though your entire workload is in the cloud, and that's where all the sensitive data is at, and maybe you don't have any on your local computer, there's nothing on your laptop, but you still have that path to the cloud potentially. You may, and I always tell people, whatever you do, if you're logging into the cloud, you're logging into all these websites because you don't have anything local, and that message pops up, do you want to save this password in the browser? Don't do that. Don't do that, please. That's one of the easiest hacking things. If someone were to get in, and of course this is where the MDR software that's constantly watching that system should stop this, but in case a piece of malware does get in that allows a bad actor access to the system, it's very easy to dump the memory of the computer, which has all the password hashes that are stored in the browser, and then those are easily cracked. That's why all these passwords are on the dark web for sale, because of this exact scenario. I actually did a big risk assessment for a CPA firm, and they were victim of this. I was like, man, we need to change this. So we end up, through their IT company, helped them roll out a password manager, which I'm a big fan of. And there's plenty out there. There's LastPass, Keeper, OnePass. So that's better. So ultimately, because you don't just want to ignore your local systems because everything's in the cloud, because there's still things on the local system that could be very useful to a bad actor if they were able to get into that system. So you got to protect that as well. Sentinel-1's, in my opinion, there's a company called Sentinel-1. So the question is, what are some good MDR softwares out there? Sentinel-1 is good. Huntress is good. Microsoft, they actually have an upgrade because there's Microsoft Defender is part of Windows, but it's just more of a base level. But there's a little bit of an upgrade that you can do to do like Defender for Business that kind of activates some of the EDR, MDR functionality. So I think those three are really good. Yes, sir.
Do they ever catch any of these guys, and what do they do to them when they catch them?
Yes. The question is, can you find these guys? Has anybody ever been caught? And what happens? Yes, absolutely. It is hard to catch them because a lot of these guys are in parts of the world where they're actually protected by, take Russia, for example. There's well-known Russian hackers that have, and I actually saw this from one of the FBI cyber task force members. He did a presentation and logged into the dark web. There was a website that a Russian hacker was hosting where you could go through and purchase stolen credit card information for any city and any state in the U.S. And that way, because if you're, say we're here in Dallas, you want to buy a Dallas-based credit card because the chances of it getting flagged as fraudulent is lower because it's local, because it has that association. Well, so the FBI showing us this says they know who this guy is. He said, we know who this guy is, but the Russian government protects him. We can't get to him. We have no jurisdiction. And since he's hacking U.S. people, they're okay with that. They're okay with protecting him. Now, the other guys who are not protected by the government, who are found, they face penalties, jail time, prison time, just depending on the severity of what they're doing. But they do get caught. I don't know about death penalty. Yeah, some people may wish that based on their experience of getting hacked. But yeah, no, I think some extensive prison time's about what the expectation is. Anything else before we wrap up? Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for spending your morning with me. I know hopefully cyber was a little bit different of a topic, and we got through the morning. And I have a booth outside, so if anybody thinks of anything else, any other questions I can answer, come by and see me. Thank you.